There are places in this world that seem to harbor the weight of darkness, where every shadow hides a secret, and every breeze whispers a warning. St. Mary's Asylum for the Insane was one of those places. It sat on a lonely hill just outside of town, its tall, Gothic structure looming over the landscape like a sentinel of despair. Built in the late 1800s, St. Mary's was originally intended as a sanctuary for those suffering from mental illness, a place where they could find peace and healing. But as the years wore on, it became something far more sinister. The asylum was overcrowded, understaffed, and underfunded. The patients, many of whom were violently disturbed, were subjected to inhumane treatments, electric shock therapy, lobotomies, and isolation in dark, cramped cells. Rumors began to circulate about the horrors that took place within its walls. Nurses and doctors whispered of patients who disappeared without a trace, of screams echoing through the halls late at night, and of shadows that moved on their own. The town's residents grew to fear the asylum, avoiding it at all costs, even in daylight. By the 1960s, the facility was abandoned, left to rot on its hilltop. The patients were relocated to more modern institutions, and St. Mary's became a dark stain on the town's history. But the stories persisted, stories of strange lights seen in the windows at night, of ghostly figures wandering the grounds, and of the cries of the damned carried on the wind. I grew up hearing those stories. My friends and I, kids with too much time and too little fear, would dare each other to go up to the asylum, to press our faces against the cracked windows and peer inside, hoping to catch a glimpse of something terrifying. We never saw anything, of course, just the dust and debris of a forgotten building, but the thrill of it was enough to keep us coming back. As we got older, our curiosity about St. Mary's only grew. We devoured every piece of information we could find, newspaper clippings, old photographs, even interviews with former staff members. We wanted to know everything about that place, to uncover its secrets and prove, once and for all, whether the stories were true. It was during our senior year of high school that we decided to do it, to spend a night inside the asylum. There were 5 of us in total. Me, my best friend Danny, his girlfriend Alicia, and our friends Sarah and Ben. We were all adrenaline junkies in our own way, always looking for the next thrill. And spending the night in St. Mary's seemed like the ultimate test of courage. We planned it meticulously, gathering flashlights, snacks, and even a Ouija board, because what's a night in a haunted asylum without trying to communicate with the dead? We chose a Friday night in October, right before Halloween, when the moon was full and the air was crisp with the first hints of winter. It was the perfect night for a ghost hunt. Over the years, the asylum had attracted its fair share of ghost hunters and thrill seekers. Some claimed to have seen apparitions of former patients, ghastly, dead-eyed figures in hospital gowns wandering the halls, their faces twisted in anguish. Others reported hearing disembodied voices, faint and garbled, as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets from the past. One of the most common stories involved a little girl who was said to have died in the asylum. Visitors reported seeing her standing in the corner of a room on the 3rd floor, her eyes wide and unblinking, her mouth twisted into a silent scream. Some said she would follow them as they moved through the building, her small footsteps echoing behind them. Another popular tale was that of Dr. Gray, the head physician during the asylum's final years. He was rumored to have conducted unspeakable experiments on the patients, pushing the boundaries of medicine and morality in his quest for knowledge. Those who ventured into his office often reported feeling a cold hand on their shoulder, as if the doctor was still there, watching, judging. Then there were the lights, strange, flickering lights that would appear in the windows at night, even though the building had long been without electricity. They would move from room to room, as if someone or something was wandering the halls with a lantern, searching for something that could never be found. We arrived at St. Mary's just after sunset. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the wind was starting to pick up, rustling the dead leaves that covered the ground. The asylum looked even more imposing up close. Its once white walls were now streaked with grime, and the windows, many of them broken, stared out at us like empty, soulless eyes. We made our way inside through a side door that had been pried open years ago. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of mold and decay. Every step we took echoed through the empty halls, the sound bouncing off the walls and disappearing into the darkness. For the first hour or so, it was just as we had expected, creepy, but nothing out of the ordinary. We explored the ground floor, finding old patient rooms filled with rusted bed frames and torn mattresses, a nurse's station with a shattered window, and a common area littered with broken furniture. It wasn't until we reached the second floor that things started to get strange. We were walking down a long, narrow hallway, the walls covered in peeling paint and faded graffiti. Our flashlights flickered as we moved, casting long shadows that seemed to dance on their own. That's when we heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from one of the rooms up ahead. Danny was the first to investigate, pushing open the door to a small, dark room at the end of the hall. Inside, there was nothing but an old wooden chair, tipped over on its side, and a single, dusty window. But the tapping continued, louder now, as if it was coming from the walls themselves. We all crowded into the room, our flashlights scanning every corner, but there was nothing there. No source for the sound, no explanation for why it was happening. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was thunderous. We all looked at each other, our eyes wide with unease. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were all thinking the same thing. This place wasn't empty. We decided to keep moving, making our way to the third floor. The stairwell was narrow and steep, the steps creaking under our weight. Halfway up, Alicia suddenly stopped, her flashlight fixed on something on the wall. It was a handprint, a small, child-sized handprint, smeared in what looked like dried blood. Jesus, Ben muttered, his voice tight with fear. What the hell is that? None of us had an answer. We just stood there, staring at the handprint, a cold chill settling in our bones. It was too small to belong to any of us, and it was too fresh to have been left there years ago. I don't like this, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Maybe we should go back. But Danny shook his head. We've come this far. We can't back out now. So we kept going, even though every instinct was screaming at us to turn around. When we reached the third floor, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Our breath puffed out in white clouds, and we huddled closer together for warmth. This floor was different from the others. The walls were covered in thick layers of dust, and the air was so heavy with decay that it was hard to breathe. The rooms were larger, more spacious, but they felt even more oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in on us. As we moved down the hallway, we noticed something strange. There were no windows on this floor. The only light came from our flashlights, which seemed to grow dimmer with each passing minute. The darkness was so complete that it felt like a living thing, pressing in on us from all sides. And then we saw her. She was standing at the end of the hallway, just outside one of the rooms. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, dressed in a tattered white nightgown. Her hair was matted and unkempt, hanging in limp strands around her pale face. But it was her eyes that sent a jolt of terror through me, wide, empty eyes that seemed to stare right through us. We all froze, unable to move or speak. The girl just stood there, her gaze fixed on us, as if she was waiting for something. "Do you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. None of us responded. We were too shocked, too terrified to do anything but stare. And then, without warning, the girl turned and walked into the room behind her. The door, which had been hanging off its hinges, creaked as it swung open, then closed with a soft click. For a moment, none of us moved. We just stood there, our hearts pounding in our chests, our minds racing with fear and disbelief. "What the hell was that?" Danny finally managed to say, his voice shaking. "Did you see her eyes?" Alicia whispered, her face pale. "They were wrong." I nodded, my throat tight with fear. There was something deeply unsettling about that girl, something that made me feel like we were intruding on something we had no business being a part of. "We need to leave," Ben said, his voice firm. "Now." None of us argued. We turned and hurried back down the hallway, our footsteps echoing in the silence. But as we reached the stairwell, the door to the room where the girl had disappeared suddenly flew open with a loud bang. We all spun around, our flashlights trained on the door. But there was nothing there, just an empty room, dark and silent. But then the tapping started again, louder this time, more insistent, as if something was trying to get out. We didn't stick around to find out what it was. We bolted down the stairs, our hearts racing, our minds filled with panic. The tapping followed us, growing louder and faster with each step we took, until it was echoing through the entire building. By the time we reached the first floor, we were practically sprinting. We burst through the side door and into the cold night air, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. We didn't stop running until we were halfway back to town. Only then did we slow down, our breath coming in ragged gasps, our bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. None of us spoke on the walk back. We were too shaken, too disturbed by what we had seen. When we finally reached Danny's house, we collapsed on the front porch, our faces pale and our minds reeling. "What the hell happened back there?" Sarah finally asked, her voice trembling. None of us had an answer. We just sat there, staring at each other, the fear still fresh in our minds. We never went back to St. Mary's after that night. The thrill of exploring the asylum had been replaced by a deep, unsettling fear. Fear of what we had seen, and fear of what might still be lurking within those walls. But the nightmares stayed with us. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the sound of that tapping still echoing in my ears. I could still see the girl's empty eyes, staring at me from the darkness, her face twisted in a silent scream. And I wasn't the only one. Danny, Alicia, Sarah, and Ben all had their own nightmares, their own memories of that night that they couldn't shake. We didn't talk about it, not with each other, and not with anyone else. It was as if acknowledging it would make it more real, more terrifying. But the fear never went away. It stayed with us, lurking in the back of our minds, a constant reminder of the darkness that we had encountered. It's been years since that night, but I still can't forget it. Every time I drive past the hill where St. Mary's once stood, I feel a cold chill run down my spine. The asylum has long since been torn down, replaced by a shopping center, but the memories remain. I sometimes wonder what we saw that night. Was it a ghost, a figment of our imaginations, or something else entirely, something that defies explanation? I'll probably never know. But one thing is certain, St. Mary's was a place of darkness, a place where the line between the living and the dead was thin, where the echoes of the past still lingered in the shadows. And no matter how much time passes, I'll never forget the fear I felt in that asylum, the sense of dread that seeped into my bones, the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I know deep down, that I'll carry the memory of that night with me for the rest of my life. Pinecrest Amusement Park was once the pride and joy of our small town. Nestled on the outskirts, surrounded by dense woods, it was a place where families gathered every summer for a day of fun and laughter. I remember going there as a kid, riding the Ferris wheel with my parents, eating cotton candy until my stomach hurt, and running around with my friends, the sun warm on my face. Pinecrest was where we all grew up, where we formed some of our happiest memories. But all of that changed one summer, decades ago, when a series of tragic accidents forced the park to close its gates for good. It started with a malfunction on the Ferris wheel, where a car broke loose, plummeting to the ground and killing 2 teenagers. Just weeks later, a roller coaster derailed, injuring several people and killing one. The final blow came when a little girl drowned in the park's lake, her body not discovered until hours later. The town was shaken to its core. Investigations were launched, but no definitive cause for the malfunctions was ever found. The park owners, devastated by the tragedies and the financial losses, decided to shut down Pinecrest indefinitely. They said it was for safety reasons, but rumors quickly spread that something more sinister was at play. People began to say the park was cursed, that it was haunted by the spirits of those who had died there. Whether or not that was true, Pinecrest Amusement Park was abandoned, left to decay under the weight of its dark past. For years, the park sat untouched, a forgotten relic of a happier time. Nature began to reclaim the land, with vines creeping over the once bright signs and trees growing through the cracks in the pavement. The rides that had once been so full of life now stood silent and rusted, their paint peeling and their mechanisms seized by time. But the stories of Pinecrest never faded. Some said they heard the laughter of children echoing through the woods at night, long after the park had closed. Others claimed to see the flickering lights of the old Ferris wheel spinning slowly in the moonlight, even though it had been inoperable for years. And then there were those who swore they saw figures moving among the rides, shadowy, indistinct forms that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Despite these tales, or maybe because of them, Pinecrest became a sort of urban legend, a place where the brave or foolish went to test their courage. Teenagers dared each other to spend a night in the park, to walk the grounds alone, or to climb to the top of the rusted roller coaster. But most of them came back with the same story: an overwhelming sense of unease, of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. My name is Alex, and I was one of those kids who grew up hearing the stories of Pinecrest Amusement Park. I had never been one to believe in ghosts or curses. I was always the skeptic, the one who laughed at horror movies and rolled my eyes at ghost stories. But there was something about Pinecrest that intrigued me, something that made me want to see it for myself. I wasn't alone in this. My friends, Ethan, Debbie, and John, shared my fascination with the abandoned park. We had been friends since middle school, and as we grew older, we bonded over our love of adventure and our curiosity about the unknown. We were all in our early 20s now, each of us taking different paths in life, but we still found time to hang out and explore the forgotten corners of our town. The idea to visit Pinecrest had been floating around for years, but we never acted on it. There was always some reason to put it off: school, work, relationships. But one summer, everything seemed to align. Ethan had just graduated from college. Debbie was between jobs. John had some time off from his internship, and I was on a break from my freelance work. We were all in town, and we were all looking for something to do. It was John who brought up the idea first. We were sitting around a bonfire in his backyard, the flames casting long shadows as the sun set behind us. We had been talking about old times, about the adventures we used to go on when John mentioned Pinecrest. We should finally do it, he said, his voice low and serious. We should go to the park. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a grin spreading across his face. You mean the haunted park? The one that's supposedly cursed? John nodded. Yeah, I mean, come on, we've been talking about it forever. Why not now? Debbie shifted in her seat, her expression thoughtful. I don't know, John. Those stories, they're pretty creepy. Creepy, sure, John replied. But they're just stories. Besides, we've faced worse, right? I stayed silent for a moment, thinking it over. I wasn't one to back down from a challenge, but something about Pinecrest gave me pause. Still, the idea of exploring the park with my friends, of finally putting the rumors to rest, was too tempting to resist. Let's do it, I said, finally breaking the silence. What's the worst that could happen? We spent the next few days preparing for our trip to Pinecrest. We gathered flashlights, batteries, snacks, and a couple of camping chairs. John even brought along his camera, hoping to capture something interesting on film. The plan was to head out to the park just before dusk, giving us enough time to explore before nightfall. As we packed, we couldn't help but discuss the stories we had heard about the park over the years. Some of them were well known, like the tale of the Ferris wheel and the roller coaster accidents. But others were more obscure, whispered about among those who had dared to visit the park after it closed. There was the story of the little girl who had drowned in the lake. Some said her ghost still wandered the park, looking for her parents, her cries for help echoing across the water. Others claimed that on certain nights you could see her standing at the edge of the lake, her white dress soaked and her hair dripping with water. Then there was the tale of the park's caretaker, a man named Henry who had stayed on long after the park closed, refusing to leave even as it fell into disrepair. According to legend, Henry had gone mad, driven insane by the loneliness and the memories of the accidents. He was said to have hanged himself in the old maintenance shed, his body not discovered until years later. Visitors claimed to have seen his ghost wandering the park, his face twisted in anguish, his rope swinging from the rafters of the shed. But the story that haunted us the most was that of the Ferris wheel. People said that on quiet nights you could hear the creaking of the wheel turning, even though it hadn't moved in decades. Some claimed to have seen the silhouettes of the two teenagers who had died, sitting in the car that had broken loose, their faces pale and their eyes empty. They said that if you got too close, you could feel a cold breeze, as if the wheel itself was still reliving that tragic day. These stories weighed heavily on our minds as we made our way to Pinecrest. We tried to laugh them off, to tell ourselves that they were just tales spun by bored teenagers looking for a scare. But deep down, we all felt a sense of unease, a nagging fear that maybe, just maybe, there was some truth to the legends. We arrived at Pinecrest just as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, but the beauty of the evening couldn't dispel the sense of dread that hung over the park. The entrance was overgrown with weeds, the old ticket booth covered in graffiti and vines. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the park, the gate hanging open on creaking hinges. We parked the car just outside the gate and gathered our things. As we crossed the threshold into the park, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my body. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and the silence was absolute. Not even the chirping of crickets broke the stillness. The first thing we noticed was the Ferris wheel. It towered above the trees, its once bright colors faded to a dull gray. The cars hung motionless, swaying slightly in the breeze. We stood there for a moment, just staring at it, the weight of its history pressing down on us. Creepy as hell, Ethan muttered, breaking the silence. Yeah, Debbie agreed, her voice shaky. But we're here, so let's do this. We decided to start by exploring the main attractions, the Ferris wheel, the roller coaster, and the lake. The path was overgrown and littered with debris, but we pressed on, our flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness. The Ferris wheel was our first stop. Up close, it was even more imposing, the metal creaking as it swayed in the wind. We walked around it, inspecting the cars, which were rusted and covered in grime. John set up his camera, hoping to catch something on film, but the wheel remained still, its secrets locked away. As we moved on to the roller coaster, the sense of unease grew stronger. The coaster's tracks were twisted and broken, the cars lying in a heap at the base of a steep drop. It was hard to believe that this had once been the park's main attraction, a place where people came for thrills and excitement. Now it was just a skeleton, a reminder of the lives that had been lost. We didn't linger at the roller coaster. Something about it felt wrong, as if the very air around it was tainted by the tragedy that had occurred there. We continued on to the lake, our footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The lake was perhaps the most unsettling part of the park. The water was still and dark, reflecting the fading light of the sky. A thin layer of mist hovered over the surface, and the trees around it seemed to close in, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. We stood at the edge, staring into the murky depths, the stories of the drowned girl playing in our minds. Do you think she's really down there?" Debbie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, my eyes fixed on the water. "But I wouldn't want to find out." We were all on edge by this point, the weight of the park's history pressing down on us. But there was still more to explore. The maintenance shed where Henry had supposedly hanged himself. It was tucked away in a corner of the park, hidden among the trees. As we approached the shed, the air became chilled, and the shadows seemed to deepen. The door was ajar, hanging crookedly on its hinges. Inside it was dark and musty, the smell of decay thick in the air. We hesitated at the threshold, none of us wanting to go in. But curiosity got the better of us, and we stepped inside. The shed was small and cluttered, filled with old tools and equipment that had long since rusted. In the center of the room, a frayed rope hung from the rafters, swaying slightly in the breeze that blew through the broken window. We all felt it at the same time, a presence, cold and oppressive, watching us from the shadows. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and my heart began to race. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "We need to get out of here," John said, his voice trembling. "Now." We didn't argue. We turned and hurried out of the shed, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we stumbled over the uneven ground. The sense of dread was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, that something was right behind us, waiting for the moment to strike. But we made it out of the shed, back into the open air. The park was completely dark now, the only light coming from our flashlights and the faint glow of the moon. The silence was ear-splitting, broken only by the sound of our ragged breaths. We decided it was time to leave. The thrill of exploring the park had long since faded, replaced by a deep, unsettling fear. We turned and made our way back to the entrance, our pace quickening with each step. But as we passed the Ferris wheel again, something caught my eye, a faint light, flickering in one of the cars. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest, and pointed it out to the others. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. They all turned to look, and sure enough the light was there, a dim, flickering glow coming from one of the cars at the very top of the wheel. We stood there, frozen, as the light grew brighter, illuminating the inside of the car. And then we saw them, two figures, sitting side by side, their faces pale and expressionless. They were staring straight ahead, not moving, not blinking. The car began to sway, the metal creaking loudly, as if the wheel was trying to turn. We didn't stick around to see what would happen next. We turned and ran, our flashlights swinging wildly as we sprinted towards the gate. The sound of the creaking wheel followed us, growing louder and more frantic, as if something was chasing us, urging us to look back. But we didn't. We burst through the gate, our breaths coming in gasps, and didn't stop running until we reached the car. We piled in, slamming the doors shut, and John floored the gas pedal, speeding away from the park as fast as he could. It's been years since that night at Pinecrest Amusement Park, but the memory of it still haunts me. I don't know what we saw, whether it was ghosts, some trick of the light, or something else entirely. But whatever it was real, and it left a mark on all of us. We never spoke about that night again, not with each other, and not with anyone else. It was as if we had all made an unspoken agreement to forget it, to pretend it never happened. But deep down, I know that none of us have truly forgotten. I still have nightmares sometimes, dreams where I'm back at the park, standing in front of the Ferris wheel, watching the figures in the car as they turn to look at me, their eyes hollow and their mouths twisted into silent screams. And every time I drive past the hill where the park once stood, I feel a chill run down my spine. The park has long since been torn down, replaced by a new housing development, but the memories remain. Some places are touched by something evil, something that leaves a stain on the land, a mark that can never be erased. Pinecrest was one of those places, and no matter how much time passes, I know I'll never forget what we saw there. And so I live with the memory, a constant reminder that there are things in this world that can't be explained, and I know deep down that Pinecrest will always be a part of me, a ghost that will haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Mia, and I've always been drawn to the eerie and the unexplained. Some might say I'm obsessed with things that go bump in the night, but I like to think of myself as curious. I'm the kind of person who watches horror movies alone in the dark, who reads ghost stories late into the night, and who searches for the truth behind local legends and myths. My friends Emma, Lucas, and Noah are the same way. We've been inseparable since college, bound together by our shared love of all things spooky. We've had our fair share of adventures, exploring haunted houses, visiting old graveyards, and trekking through supposedly cursed woods. But nothing had ever truly scared us. Not really. That is, until we decided to visit the abandoned town of Stillwater. Stillwater was the stuff of local legend. It was a small town nestled deep in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests, and cut off from the rest of the world. For years it thrived as a mining community, but then, without warning, it was abandoned. No one knew why, and the town quickly became shrouded in mystery. Rumors swirled about what had happened to the residents. Some said they had all disappeared overnight, others claimed they had gone mad and killed each other. But no one knew for sure. What was certain, however, was that Stillwater had a reputation for being cursed. Those who dared to visit often returned with chilling tales of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and a pervasive sense of dread. Some didn't return at all. Naturally, we were intrigued. Stillwater had been on our radar for years, but it was remote and difficult to access, and the stories were enough to give us pause. But this year something changed. Maybe it was the restlessness that comes with turning 30, or maybe we were just looking for a new thrill, but we decided it was time to finally visit Stillwater. It was a decision we would come to regret. Stillwater was founded in the late 1800s, during the height of the gold rush. The town grew rapidly, attracting miners and their families from all over the country. It was a bustling community, with a general store, a schoolhouse, a church, and a small hospital. The mine was the heart of the town, providing jobs and prosperity for the residents. For years, Stillwater thrived. The mine was rich with gold, and the town became known for its wealth and close-knit community. But as the years went on, the gold began to dwindle. The mine became less profitable, and tensions started to rise among the residents. There were rumors of fights breaking out, of disputes over money and land, but Stillwater held on, determined to survive. Then, one winter, something strange happened. The town was cut off from the outside world by a severe snowstorm, roads were blocked, and the telegraph lines were down. When the storm finally passed and travelers arrived in Stillwater, they found the town abandoned. Houses were left as if the residents had simply walked away. Fires still burned in the hearths, food was left on the tables, and personal belongings were scattered about. But the people were gone. Every single resident had vanished without a trace. The authorities were baffled. A search was conducted, but no bodies were found, no signs of struggle or violence. It was as if the entire town had simply disappeared. The mine was searched, but it was empty. The surrounding woods were combed, but there was no sign of the missing residents. It was as if they had been swallowed up by the earth itself. The disappearance of Stillwater's residents became a local legend, one that grew darker with each retelling. Some said the town was cursed, that the spirits of the miners had returned to claim the souls of the living. Others believed the residents had gone mad, driven to insanity by something they found in the mine. But the truth remained elusive. Over the years, the town fell into ruin. The buildings were left to decay, and the forest began to reclaim the land. But despite its abandonment, Stillwater never truly faded from memory. The stories persisted, drawing in those who were curious or foolish enough to seek out the truth. The legends surrounding Stillwater's last residents were as varied as they were chilling. Each story seemed to offer a different explanation for the town's abandonment, but they all shared one thing in common: a sense of foreboding, as if something evil had taken hold of the town and refused to let go. One of the most popular legends involved a man named Samuel Blackwood, the foreman of the mine. According to the story, Blackwood was a hard man, ruthless in his pursuit of gold. He drove the miners to work long hours in dangerous conditions, caring little for their safety. Some said he made a pact with the devil, trading the souls of the miners for wealth and power. Others claimed he discovered something in the mine, something dark and ancient that drove him mad. In the end, it was said that Blackwood led the townspeople into the mine, where they were never seen again. Another legend told of a plague that swept through the town, a mysterious illness that caused the residents to become violent and paranoid. They turned on each other, driven to madness by fever and hallucinations. The survivors fled into the woods, where they succumbed to the elements or were devoured by wild animals. Their bodies were never found, but their spirits were said to haunt the town, seeking vengeance on those who disturbed their final resting place. Then there were the stories of the Wendigo, a creature from Native American folklore said to possess the bodies of the living and turn them into cannibals. Some believed the miners had disturbed an ancient burial ground, awakening the Wendigo and sealing the town's fate. The creature was said to roam the woods around Stillwater, preying on anyone who dared to venture too close. There were countless other stories, tales of ghostly apparitions, of voices whispering in the night, of strange lights seen in the sky above the town. Each story added to the town's mystique, turning it into a place of dread and fascination. Over the years, a few brave or foolish souls had ventured into Stillwater, seeking to uncover the truth behind the legends. Most of them returned with tales of unease, of strange noises in the night, and the feeling of being watched. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving among the ruins, while others reported hearing disembodied voices whispering their names. One of the most famous accounts came from a group of hikers who had decided to camp near the town. They claimed that on the first night they heard the sound of footsteps outside their tent, but when they looked, no one was there. The next day they explored the town, finding it eerily silent and still. That night the footsteps returned, louder and closer, accompanied by the sound of something dragging across the ground. The hikers packed up and left before sunrise, vowing never to return. Another account came from a journalist who had visited Stillwater to write a piece on its history. He spent the night in one of the old houses, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal. According to his report, he awoke in the middle of the night to find the room freezing cold, despite it being the middle of summer. He saw the figure of a man standing at the foot of his bed, dressed in old mining gear. The figure said nothing, just stared at him with hollow eyes. The journalist fled the town the next morning, abandoning his story. Perhaps the most disturbing account came from a group of teenagers who had gone to Stillwater on a dare. They claimed to have found an old diary in one of the houses, filled with incoherent ramblings about voices in the walls and something lurking in the mine. As they read the diary aloud, they heard a loud crash from the other room. When they went to investigate, they found the furniture overturned, as if something had ransacked the place. They left immediately, and when they returned a week later, the diary was gone. These stories, along with the countless others that circulated over the years, only added to Stillwater's reputation as a place of darkness and fear. But despite the warnings, we were determined to see it for ourselves. We wanted to know if the stories were true, if the town was really as haunted as people said. The day of our visit to Stillwater was bright and sunny, with not a cloud in the sky. It seemed almost absurd that we were about to explore a place with such a dark reputation on such a beautiful day. We loaded up the car with our gear, flashlights, cameras, snacks, and a map we had printed out from the internet. Stillwater wasn't marked on any official maps, but we had found an old, hand-drawn one online that we hoped would lead us to the town. The drive took several hours, taking us deep into the mountains. The roads became narrower and more winding the closer we got, the trees pressing in on either side. Eventually, we had to leave the car behind and continue on foot, following the map through the dense forest. As we walked, the air grew cooler and the sunlight dimmed as the trees blocked out the sky. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our footsteps crunching on the leaves. It felt as if we were the only people for miles, cut off from the rest of the world. After what felt like an eternity, we finally emerged from the trees and found ourselves standing at the edge of Stillwater. The town was exactly as we had imagined it, silent, desolate, and crumbling. The buildings were in various states of decay, their windows shattered, their roofs caving in. The streets were overgrown with weeds, and the air smelled of damp earth and rotting wood. We stood there for a moment, taking it all in. It was hard to believe that this place had once been a thriving community, full of life and activity. Now, it was just a ghost town, abandoned and forgotten. Creepy Emma said, breaking the silence. But kind of cool, too. Definitely creepy, Lucas agreed, his eyes scanning the town. I can see why people say it's haunted. Noah nodded, his expression serious. Let's stick together, okay? I don't want anyone getting lost. We agreed and started walking down the main street, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The buildings loomed over us, their dark windows like empty eyes. It felt as if the town was watching us, waiting to see what we would do. We explored the town for a while, taking pictures and peering into the buildings. Most of them were empty, just shells of what they had once been. But in some we found remnants of the past, old furniture, rusted tools, faded photographs. It was as if the town had been frozen in time, preserved in its final moments before it was abandoned. As the day went on, The atmosphere in the town began to change. The bright sunshine that had accompanied us on our journey began to fade, replaced by a thick, overcast sky. The air grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over us. The silence, which had seemed peaceful at first, now felt oppressive, as if something was lurking just out of sight, waiting to pounce. We decided to take a break and set up camp in one of the more intact houses. It was a small, one-story building with peeling wallpaper and a sagging roof, but it seemed sturdy enough. We built a fire in the old fireplace and sat around it, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over us. As the night fell, the town took on a different character. The shadows grew longer, and the wind picked up, howling through the empty streets. The fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to dispel the cold that had seeped into our bones. "Do you guys feel that?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like the temperature just dropped 10 degrees. "I feel it too," Lucas said, rubbing his hands together. "It's freezing in here." "It's just the wind," Noah said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Old buildings like this aren't exactly insulated." But I knew it wasn't just the wind. There was something else, something unseen but palpable, that was making the air feel heavy and cold. I glanced at the others and saw that they were all tense, their eyes darting around the room as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows. "Maybe we should turn in for the night," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can explore more in the morning." They agreed, and we unrolled our sleeping bags on the floor. But sleep didn't come easily. The house creaked and groaned in the wind, and every little noise made my heart race. I kept expecting to hear footsteps, or see a shadow move in the corner of my eye. But the night passed uneventfully, and by morning I almost convinced myself that the sense of dread had just been in my head. We spent the next day exploring the town more thoroughly. We visited the old schoolhouse, the church, and finally the mine. The entrance to the mine was boarded up, but we found a hole in the fence and slipped through. The mine was pitch black, and our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were slick with moisture. As we ventured deeper into the mine, the sense of unease returned, stronger than before. The darkness seemed to close in around us, and the silence was so complete that it felt as if we had entered another world, one that was cold and lifeless. We came across an old cart, rusted and decaying, filled with rocks and debris. It looked as if it had been abandoned in the middle of a shift, left behind by miners who had fled in a hurry. The tracks that ran along the floor of the mine disappeared into the darkness, leading deeper into the earth. "Let's keep going," Noah said, his voice echoing off the walls. "I want to see how far this goes." But I hesitated. Something about the mine felt wrong, as if we were trespassing on ground that was not meant for the living. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was waiting for us in the darkness. "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "Maybe we should turn back." Noah gave me a reassuring smile. "It's just a mine, Mia. There's nothing down here but rocks and old equipment." But his words did little to comfort me. The further we went, the stronger the sense of dread became, until it was almost suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around us, and the air grew colder and colder, until I could see my breath in front of me. Then, without warning, the mine began to shake. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and rocks began to fall from the ceiling. We turned and ran, our flashlights bobbing wildly as we scrambled to get out of the mine. The shaking grew stronger, and I could hear the sound of something collapsing behind us, the deafening roar of stone grinding against stone. We burst out of the mine, gasping for breath, and collapsed on the ground outside. The shaking had stopped, but the air was still thick with dust, and the sound of falling rocks echoed in the distance. "What the hell was that?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "An earthquake," Lucas suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't an earthquake. It was something else." We didn't say anything more, but I could see the fear in their eyes. We had come to Stillwater looking for a thrill, but what we had found was something far darker and more terrifying than we had ever imagined. It's been months since our visit to Stillwater, but the memory of it still haunts me. I can't explain what happened in that mine, or what we experienced in that town, but I know it was real. Something was there, something dark and malevolent, and it didn't want us to leave. I still have nightmares sometimes, dreams of the mine, of the darkness closing in around us, of the ground shaking beneath our feet. I dream of the town, of the empty streets and the decaying buildings, of the sense of dread that hung over everything like a thick fog. In my dreams, I hear the voices of the townspeople, calling out from the darkness, begging for help that will never come. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about the legends we heard, about the stories of the townspeople who vanished without a trace. I wonder if they're still there, trapped in that town, doomed to wander its empty streets for eternity. I wonder if we came close to meeting the same fate. I'll never know for sure what happened in Stillwater, but one thing is certain: I'll never go back. There are some places that are best left undisturbed, some mysteries that are better left unsolved. Stillwater is one of those places, a town lost to time and darkness, a place where the living have no business being. And so I try to move on, to forget the fear and the darkness, to live my life as if that visit to Stillwater was just a bad dream. But deep down, I know that the town is still there, waiting in the mountains, hidden in the trees. And I know that, no matter how far I run, a part of me will always be there, trapped in the darkness of that abandoned town.